Hello, welcome to episode 16 of Coffee with Centuro. I'm Zan Ali, joined by the ever-present Ben Blackbird and Siraj Thofi. How you guys doing?
Good, thanks. Good to be here.
Nice. So,
howdy. Good to be back for another episode. Recording on a Friday, which is nice, just ahead of the weekend.
So I think we're going to go with some quick-fire news stories straight in, and then we're dedicating, after that, the whole episode to one company. Right, news, let's go. So first of all, I don't know if you guys saw this because it's very recent, but Bank of America released a report yesterday saying that Generation Z or Gen Z have the fastest growing economic power in the world. And by 2030, they will make up a quarter of world spending, overtaking millennials for spending power. So Siraj, do you know what Gen Z is?
No, that's because I'm even before millennials. I mean, are you guys millennials? What am I? I'm not a baby boomer. I'm in between that. I don't know what.
You're an X. You're a Generation
I'm
X.
an X. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, Generation Z. Can they drink legally yet? Are they where are they in the world?
They are between 8 years old and 23, I think, something like that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
millennials is a bigger age group than people expect. I think we all assume that's all the youngsters, but actually I think millennials is up to, you would be 39 now and you're still a millennial. So I think people just lose track that we're in 2020, like 1990 seems like 10 years ago.
Yeah,
millennials is quite an old age group, but yeah, so I think that's the and we'll put you up in the next one, Siraj.
Generation X sounds cool though. It's like X-Men, isn't it?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But this is important because for businesses looking to prepare for the next generation, if these guys have got so much spending power, if you can kind of see what their characteristics are, spending habits, that can really help you prepare. So this report said that Generation Z, they're going to focus a lot more on environmental and social causes. So for an investment perspective, if you look at sustainable, ESG kind of opportunities, you can make a lot of money there. I mean, I'm not financially regulated. It's just a comment. And apparently, Ben's not going to like this one. More than half of Gen Z claim not to drink alcohol compared to a third of millennials. And they smoke a lot less tobacco, but are likely to consume more marijuana.
Okay.
I think that tracks. Yeah, I think not drinking is becoming a more trendy thing to do. I think especially though, like a lot of successful people are slightly leading the way on that. You hear a lot of artists that are getting quite up there have just off alcohol, and all the really successful people quite often say that's one thing they skipped. And then obviously the legalization of marijuana is becoming more popular, and everyone's at this stage. I've never really smoked, but so I think me and younger is going to be that generation that was just brought up on it being bad. I never saw the ads where it was cool. It was still the cool thing to do at school and whatnot, obviously, but just everything now is obviously smoking kills. It's so dumb. Even people that smoke know it's not a good thing to be doing. So I think it makes sense that the next generation are the ones where it's just almost by default that's not the cool thing to do. Marijuana's probably the cool thing to do now.
I also think media consumption is going to be a thing, right? I mean, and you can see that if that's where the spend's going to be, that's why magazines are dead, right? Because Generation Z are going, what's a magazine? It's like, I don't get it. It's what you print it on paper. You can't update it once it's printed. You can't zoom. I can't play the video. For me, I always go I'm good with social media, but TikTok, please, I don't believe in that. But the whole of Generation Z is on TikTok. So if you as a business want to target that massive portion of the target audience, you got to be on there.
Yeah, that's it. So that's one thing to look out for businesses. Second story in the news, COVID-19 has apparently shaken up the world's most expensive cities to live in list. That's compiled by the Economist Intelligence Unit. Economist. There we go.
So,
apparently,
have a sip of your coffee, I think.
Yeah. Apparently, cities in the Americas, Africa, and Eastern Europe have become cheaper to live in this past year, whilst Western Europe and Asia has become more expensive. So, can you guys guess the top 3 most expensive cities?
London's got to be top, somewhere close, or is
London's not in the top 10.
Okay.
It's that, yeah, I don't think it's that bad. Generally London. I'm gonna throw somewhere in the Middle East in there. I'm gonna chuck in a Dubai.
Not in the top 10.
I'm going
No?
with Zurich.
Going with
Yeah.
where? Zurich.
Zurich.
Yeah.
Zurich is correct. So
Yeah.
the top three are actually joint first. So it's Zurich, Paris, and Hong Kong.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, Singapore, Osaka were originally top. They've dropped to 4th and 5th. Tel Aviv is 5th. So you were kind of on the right lines, Ben, with Middle East. Geneva is 7th. New York 8th, Copenhagen 9th, and LA 10th. So there you go. There's the top 10 most expensive places to live.
But I mean, don't you think with COVID again, living in those cities are becoming less of a factor? Because now, the likes of Ben, who pays like premium to be in the middle of London, it's becoming less of a factor because we're just all working from home anyway. You don't need to commute and all of that. So I'm wondering how spatial planning is going to change as all of that changes, and where the value shifts from a and you could actually, from a pure property value point of view, get caught really short if you just bought in a very expensive place in London, and then the whole shift goes to just the outer ring. That's going to be, you might end up sitting with the lemon.
Yeah, I think the difficulty, you're also looking at like landlords and so forth as well. Some friends of mine are trying to rent out just a room in a fairly good place in London, but it's just a renter's market. Everyone's demanding cheaper prices, everyone's moving out, and like they just can't get anyone in. And so the landlord's being, a little stubborn on moving on the price, but they're just going to have an empty room there. So yeah, I think as well as buying for yourself, anybody who's just gone into the rental market, bought to let and so forth, it's going to hit some people. Some people are going to find a way to make a lot of money of it. I guess that's always the swings and roundabouts. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the cities do. I mean, it's nice to travel to those places that were expensive before, once we're allowed to.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final story for today. SpaceX launched the first ever NASA crewed mission that took place in a privately built spaceship. So it took 27 hours to get to dock in with the International Space Station. And I just thought it was quite remarkable. So, 51 years ago, you had the moon landing. Some people, conspiracy theorists, still think that was faked. Well, now you've got a privately built spaceship, doing all these crazy things. So, I mean, what do you guys think?
It's exciting because also the next step is you won't have to be an astronaut. You'll just have to have enough money, and then once we figure it out, we can pop up there and do an episode. We might put that as an expense for Centuro, a few $100,000 each. But I think that's exciting to see the privatization of it opens up opportunities. I think obviously that's what a lot of the competition and everything it brings is I think exciting to see how it all goes.
I'm thinking about the future of Centuro as well, but more on, at the moment we expand and we help people with global expansion. But in about 10, 20 years time, we'll be going, right, so where do we expand to now? Is it Mars? Is it the moon?
Should we jump on the universal expansion bandwagon now?
There we go.
Should that be our differentiator? Don't forget about global. We're universal.
Scaling.
Yeah. We'll set up a partnership with SpaceX. Set yourself up an office on the moon.
There we
That's
go.
what you can buy. You can buy an address on the moon now, right? So who's going to be the first person to let you set up a company based off that address? And you can send your debt collectors that way.
The tax implications are if you're based on the moon.
That's it.
What's the code? Nice.
There's the
Make up our own laws.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the news. I'm going to swiftly move into the case study for today. So I really wanted to talk about Uber. We've mentioned them quite a few times in previous episodes, but I was looking into their kind of international expansion journey, and they have grown so rapidly in such a short space of time. I think some people say they're probably one of the most successful tech startup scaling stories. So I thought we're going to discuss them today. Okay. Before we begin, just want to ask you guys, are you fans of Uber? Yay, nay?
I mean, in general, in practice, yeah. I think they came and disrupted the market. I think it was a case of it's super useful for us, obviously, for the users. I've used them quite interesting to get in the market, but that we'll leave that to the side. They've had their controversy and whatever not, but I think in general, I think it's quite a good disruptive thing.
In South Africa, we had normal taxi cabs, but they were very much aimed at the tourist market, very expensive, and locals never used it. And Uber came along and really disrupted that massively. There were, a big kind of problems in South Africa because the meter taxi cabs were like attacking Uber drivers. But besides that, it opened up a market to people who I've never used a taxi cab in South Africa, but when Uber came, used it regularly. I know a lot of my friends who drink kind of are a lot more responsible now because I'll just take an Uber. It's so much more convenient. And so I think it's been a massive shift, and yes, it's disrupted the market, but it's done it in a good way for the consumer, let's say.
Yeah. So, they were founded in 2009 by Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp, so 11 years ago. And today they are in over 900 cities and supposedly have millions of users on a daily basis. So rapid growth, 2020, 10, 11 years to do that. So I did a bit of research. So in my opinion, I'd kind of summarize the three key reasons for their success. So one of them, the fact that it's such a fantastic, simple, easy to use product for such a large market, like everyone around the world can use it, every single country. Secondly, highly repeatable model. So I'm going to explain their expansion playbook a little bit later, but it was, here's the model, we're going to go into this region, bish, bash, bosh, that's done, onto the next one, which enabled rapid growth. And then the third reason is huge pockets. So they had millions of funding from pretty early on. So I think within the first 2 years, they had close to $50 million in funding. And again, I'll explain a little bit later how they kind of use that to their advantage. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by flagging a couple of things they did really well from a planning perspective before they went into a new market. And then after that, we'll go into the breakdown of their playbook. So the first one's one of our favorites. We always talk about this. Localization. So can you guys guess how, just on a high level, what a couple of things Uber may have done to localize to their market? I know Ben's lived in London for ages, but Australian, I'm British, Sarah, you're in Cape Town. Don't know if there's any differences we may pick up on.
But I've only used Uber here. But
yeah, no, just their campaigns. They definitely localized their advertising campaigns. They did. I know they sponsor some signage around the football, so you're getting kind of global branding. But the local branding was definitely localized to South African kind of message and everything else. And then they also localize the cost, so it's not exactly the same. So the concept is all the same, but you definitely don't pay the same in South Africa as you do in Dubai or London.
Yeah, I think I got onto it through word of mouth, to be honest, and I don't watch a lot of TV or anything, so I don't get hit with much advertising. I do obviously on platforms like YouTube and Instagram and so forth, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have a specific example in mind now.
So some of the things they did, so subtle things. So in certain countries, they would tailor the look of the cars on the interface. So the car that appears in London is different to in Tokyo or in Buenos Aires. And then one I quite like in India, apparently a lot of places don't have addresses. So they've got a feature where the rider can take a picture and send the picture to the driver. This is where I am. And then the driver finds them based on GPS and the picture. So that was quite clever. And then in China's a whole different story. We'll save that for another episode. But they supposedly failed in China. Anyway, when they first entered, they partnered with Alipay because most consumers in China don't, link up their debit cards or credit cards. They go through Alipay. So that's some of the ways they localized it, which is a pretty good way to do it. We spoke about Starbucks a few weeks ago. They didn't go for the localization effort. It all went wrong. And then the second thing, I think.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Are you allowed to pay with cash in London? Or is it only
in London?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's all automated.
In normal old taxis, we'll take it.
no, but
you
they
don't.
introduced, they launched with just credit card on the app, and then they included cash in South Africa afterwards. So you could book it and everything else, and then you could pay the driver cash, and it added a whole lot of another layer of complexity to everything over here. But it's interesting that's because we have a big population of unbanked in South Africa. I think they knew that if they wanted to grow into the into that market, they needed to open up a cash option.
Interesting. I guess they were maybe charging the driver per ride then, and then the driver just had to figure out the difference. Obviously, I'm getting charged two bob for this ride, but I'm getting given 6 in the hand. So they must. Because I wonder how. Obviously, the benefit of all the transactions being online is Uber just takes their cut, right?
Yeah, because the, as far as I know, because there were some credit card payments, they would take the overall rate, and if you happen to take a lot more cash, they'll just hold a bigger portion of the credit card bill, and they could always cut you off if there isn't a difference. So if for some reason you only collected cash, you then owed it to Uber, you would have to pay it that way, or they just cut you off.
Fair enough.
Again, that's just the localization side of things. They did it here, they didn't do it there. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, so now I'm going to go into their expansion playbook. So they've got, from what I can gather, almost 7 steps that they always use. So this playbook is actually one of the ones they used originally. So they've been around for so long now, so everyone kind of knows who they are. So I feel like they've probably adapted it since. But this is what they first used in the first few years to enter a market. So number 1, they would originally look to secretly enter a new market, kind of like a guerrilla. So that's with a U, not an O. So when our Uber targets a new city, they first found a team. So they always look to appoint 3 members. So you have the general manager. They look for an entrepreneurial person who can manage the operation in that region. They look for an operations manager and a community manager. And the purpose of this is if you've got a strong foundation in that city, it's almost like a brand new business. Even though it's a branch, they localize decision-making power. So it enables you to grow fast, and you're not micromanaging, you haven't got your fingers in all the pies from a decision-making process. So I think that's quite important. So what they would do is they'd go in, and I think the key for them, it's a little bit of chicken and egg, where you need drivers and you need riders. If you don't have any drivers, it's going to be a poor experience for riders because they won't find anyone on the app. If you have lots of drivers but there's no riders, then they're going to have a poor experience and leave it. So what they would do is they'd go in, they'd speak to existing minicab companies and say, oh, whilst your drivers are idle, we've just got this app. And they don't explain the long-term concept. They say, we've got this app, whilst they're idle, if they want to use it, there might be some customers on there and you can get some extra rides and extra commissions. Then, as those drivers get used to using it longer term, they then started offering them, oh, we'll pay you $700, we'll pay you $1,000, leave your minicab company, go full-time with Uber. Again, it's on their own time as drivers, but that was the way they'd entice them. And they would also bring in local ambassadors. So these guys, they would offer them commission for every driver they brought in and for every customer. They were told you can give away free rides to new customers. And they would only market through word of mouth. So mostly through these ambassadors. They would never do a campaign. So it's kind of under the radar. And one of the main, actually, I'll get onto the main reason for that. But to give you another example of one of the tactics, in Mexico, they use drones to kind of recruit drivers. So they'd send these drones out with a little message, do you want to be a driver? I've got an opportunity for you. And they target specific regions. So I think it's quite interesting how they would sneak into a region. I mean, Suraj, you've mentioned in the past that you had your own fleet of Uber drivers. I mean, what was that process like?
Yeah, look, it wasn't a massive fleet. I had a couple of cars. Look, I must tell you, it's a harrowing experience. I went into it at the time because I thought this sounded interesting. So I got in not as early as some people, but probably in the second year that it was in South Africa. Bought 3 cars. You had to apply for a slot, and because they were. You had to jump through a lot of hoops to be an accredited owner of 3 spots. And in South Africa, we had less of a let's just put it, the people who could be the drivers were not the owners of the vehicles. And I think the Uber model works when someone's they're driving their own vehicle. So I bought the vehicles, got 3 drivers on there, and then we did that. It was okay for a while until they introduced the cash. So when it was only credit card, all the money came to me, and then every week, and then I would pay the driver. As soon as there was cash, the driver had more money and he owed me every week. And then inevitably he just kind of, oh, I can't pay you this week because I spent the money already. And it kind of, before you knew it, 2-3 weeks, he owed me 2,000 Rand. And I was like, dude, you're not paying me. I'm sorry, you're gone. And then I lose $2,000, get a new guy, and it just keeps going. So I think the cash thing really messed up for the owners, the side of things. Also, if you're not driving your own car, you don't drive as neatly and as carefully. So I had many accidents. So it was, I did it for 2 years and I was out. And I think all in all came out even on this, but it was good. It's very good on the cash flow because you're getting money in every single week. So that was good. Yeah, I think I find it interesting is that Uber is well known as being one of the leading tech brands, right? It's a tech app and everything else, but their success comes from an infrastructure that is real world infrastructure. They needed to have real people on the ground in real cars. They just worked the system that they'd never owned it. So Uber has millions of users and probably hundreds of thousands of cars, but they never owned any, and they just ensured the transaction through the tech, and held some money on it. Zan, are you getting to their success because you're going the successful expansion? But what about financial success? Do you know how they do you go there?
I wasn't planning on going there, so if you want to share anything, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say that they're also known to be making billions of dollars loss, right? Which is fun. I'm kind of going, you don't own any of the cars. You purely just transacting. Where's that money going to? How are you losing billions of dollars every year? So they are putting a lot of money into infrastructure and licensing and just a lot of marketing, a lot of different.
I'll explain where some of this money's going in a bit.
Okay, good.
I think entering a market secretly makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you are a new company, investors always want you to prove you've got some sort of organic success, right? Prove there is a market there, prove that you've got some market fit, and then we'll explode. We'll give you some investment, then you explode. Hopefully your growth and so forth, right? So I think it makes sense to go in, figure out the nuances, and I bet there's also a good bit of time there where they can iterate, right? Where they can make decisions and they can go, oh, actually, in this place, we need Alipay because no one will sign up with a credit card. Let's deviate the model and try and localize in this way. So I think it makes sense. And then, like you said, when you do launch, there's already a bunch of people in it, and word of mouth starts taking over. So you're starting with some momentum almost. So I think it makes sense as a first step into a new market.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the main motivations. That's how you kind of get yourself established. But then beyond that, the secondary reason is also because they wanted to ignore taxi regulations. One of their biggest challenges in scaling is every country, every city, even in certain countries, states, have their own taxi regulations or their own laws and other regulations. And Uber argued that they are different. They're not a taxi company. They are this tech app. They are a facilitator. So they shouldn't abide by those rules. So that was their argument. And by going in sneakily, building up a bit of a kind of customer base, getting that off the ground, then going with a full marketing campaign, build up goodwill. At that point, they've got a lot of people on their side who kind of gives them motivation to not be not to be regulated in that same way. So what they also did was they would suffer a lot of fines for breaking the law, but they thought, we've got so much money, we've got this VC money. So some of that money, Suraj, they would just say, we don't care, we'll just pay the fines, we're going to keep operating, we're going to ignore those laws. And then one of the responses governments would do, apparently in a lot of regions, they would launch sting operations. So they would say, they'd go to drivers directly. If you're caught working for Uber, you get a massive fine. So what did Uber do? Don't worry, drivers, we'll pay your fines, we'll cover any legal bills. You just keep working, you do your thing, we're going to make you money.
I mean, they did that to us, right, in South Africa, and my drivers would get impounded. They actually take your car, they impound it. It costs 7 Rand per kilometer on an Uber trip, which is like minuscule, like 35p for you guys. But if your car gets impounded, it's 10,000 Rand to get it released. Okay, it's 10 grand. It's a lot of money. That is 2 weeks of what that whole car could bring in. Like my cars were bringing in around, actually more. It's almost a month's worth per car what it was bringing in, and all it would be is I would have to pay to get the car released, show them the thing, and they would pay it back in less than a week. The money would be in the bank. I mean, it's crazy money. And the cops were just great. They knew they would stand at the airport because that's the biggest biggest place where guys would come, and they see because you don't have your little license disc that you're meant to have, boop, 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 they would just impound like tens of almost close to 100 cars on a sting. Crazy stuff. And yeah, but then they start, when they're big enough, they start negotiating with the city and they start applying officially, and now most of the Uber cars are legal, and that's happening a lot less.
Yeah, and I mean, it must be working for them, right? I know in London, they officially lost their license for a little while there. I think it was September last year. They technically lost their license to operate in London. And then I know there was an appeal, because I remember at the time, it's obviously way before lockdowns and whatnot, we were thinking about, Bolt started popping up as a competitor, and people were sending each other referral codes, and everything was jumping out of that. But then eventually, I think I just stopped paying attention to it, and Uber still runs, and I don't know what happened, but they're still going.
They were accused of failing like safety standards, so they made some changes, adapted their protocols, and then they passed.
Yeah, and no disruption from a user perspective, other than obviously the news said they were going to go away. But I don't remember any point in time that there was any disruption. So it's working for them, I guess. Get so big that you can. I mean, the government obviously tried to shut them down, even though they were quite big, but they're able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you a quick story? What happened to one of my drivers is that he had picked someone up, and they knew that it was a Friday night that the cops were going to be out. So he asked the driver, the passenger, do you mind coming to sit up front, so that we just look like we friends, right? We're not just. And then he got to a roadblock, and he told because even as passengers, you know that this is happening. So he just said, just please go with it. Just say I'm your driver. And he hid his phone under the seat, and the copper came there and said, where are you going? He says, no, I'm just driving my mate home, my friend home. And so the cop said, okay, I'll sit at the back. You say that he's your friend, so take him home. And luckily the driver did check. The driver knew where he was going, because normally they're following it on the screen. So he drove the guy. And then the guy got out, said cheers, and then the cop went, right, you got to end your trip now. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going. And then the poor guy took his phone out, ended the trip, and had his car impounded. It's kind of it was just classic. Yeah,
ballsy move. I like it.
Yeah, tried his luck.
Yeah.
So that brings us on to the next thing. So in order to avoid breaking all these laws, the next thing Uber does is they start lobbying the relevant government or state government. So they actually hire employees whose sole job it is to gain political influence and pushing for regulations that legalize its operations. So in the US in 2016, they spent $1.36 million just on lobbying government, just to change those laws. And then they've also done some of this in other ways, not just in kind of halls of local governments, but on the streets. So in Canada, for example, Dragon's Den, they got one of the investors, one of the stars of that, to just drive around the car for a day and create a buzz in the city. And everyone's like, oh my God, I want to be driven around by that guy. Can't remember his name. Sorry, no offense to him. Don't think he'll be watching this. And then they also would do campaigns like they partner with local charities. So they would say, for everyone who donates $5 to X charity, we'll give you a free ride. And that way they build up goodwill with charities. So next thing you know, you've got celebrities on your side, you've got charities, influential charities on your side. Now, if the local state comes along and tries to, impose some regulations on you, everyone's gonna be like, well, what are you doing? Let them operate. We love them. So, I mean, it's quite sneaky, isn't it? I mean, do you think it's a little bit, I'd use the word Machiavellian?
A little bit, yeah. I think there's definitely some tactics to it.
I think it's super clever. I mean, the popular opinion counts, and I feel like what happens is the value proposition was so much better than the alternative that even the regulators were using it. Right? I'm almost certain that the guys who are making the laws and having to find them are going, I just need an Uber to go out.
Yeah. Up to the pub.
Because the value proposition is so much better than the alternative, it's bound to eventually take there. So they did the classic, we're going to dip, we're going to make a loss for a while, but when it goes, we're going to be huge. And I think that's the kind of message they were giving their investors, going, bear with us. We're going to lose for now, but when we gain, we're going to be huge.
Yeah. And then once they've done all of that, they're ready, they're good to go. So the next step, they monopolize the market. So at this point, hire more drivers, pour more money into actual promotion, active marketing. It's not underground anymore, it's full throttle, and capture that whole private car hire market. And then off you go, off to the next city, rinse and repeat. There's two more steps, which I don't actually know how accurate these are, because I found these online and there's a lot of controversy around Uber and there's a lot of people complaining. So some of these are a bit more accusatory rather than official playbook moves. So we'll go through those. So the next one is undermine the competition. So according to Lyft, so Lyft is one of the competitors in the US. So they claim that Uber actually got their employees to order and cancel thousands of rides from Lyft. So it would create loads of demand on the Lyft app. All the drivers would be rushing to get it. They can't meet that demand. So genuine riders are like, we can't book a driver because of all these fake requests. Those fake requests then get cancelled. So Lyft ends up not delivering on the journeys, and genuine users are like, this is rubbish. So that's one accusation. And then the other one was they would offer drivers of competitors like Lyft, hey, join us, $1,000. Come on, leave the competitor, come join us. So there's some of the accusations that have been thrown out there. I mean, what do you think?
It sounds conspiracy theory, quite conspiracy theorist, I must admit. I mean, one of the downsides to the business model is that what's stopping you from being on both apps? And that's what we found now as Bolt has started really. Bolt's come into the market and taken a big chunk of Uber again. So it's quite strange to see Uber as the incumbent, because they were the challenger brand and the disruptor for a while. Then Bolt came in, and now you know for sure that the driver is sitting with two phones, and whichever one goes off first, he accepts, and he puts the other one off, and he goes. So it's a tough one, because I almost feel that, again, as the follower, you can wait, you can let Uber go through all of that hardship that you just mentioned and paying all the money on the things, and eventually Bolt come in and go, ping, I'm in. And just as a matter of interest, Bolt, it's cheaper to use Bolt. The percentage that the driver gets on Bolt is much higher. So the drivers are more inclined to be on Bolt because they're making more per trip, but Bolt does not pay for any of those the fines and things. So Bolt just kind of sat back and went, you've done all the hard work. I'm going to offer a bigger percentage. I'm not going to take all of those other risks, and I'm just going to chow. So
just be happy to be second place. Yeah. I think in terms of undermining, I always find some of these things a bit conspiracy theory. Like if you were paying people to make thousands of things, I suppose other than a lot of NDAs, someone would have come out and said, "Yep, I got paid 100 quid by Uber to harass Lyft at some point," or Lyft could show the data that Zayn Ali booked and cancelled 100 times, and that's why they had to block his account. So some of those things I find are, they seem unrealistic or like almost not to the benefit of the company that much. Like, just as an off-piece example, where, people joke about McDonald's nuggets not being chicken, and it just feels like they're so big that
KFC started that one.
Yeah, exactly. But like they're so big, it wouldn't make sense for them not to be chicken, because the controversy they'd go through versus the savings of, I don't know, blending the meat with whatever it's meant to be blended with, cardboard or whatever. Like, I just don't see the value, the risk versus the reward weighing out. So I think things like, trying to get the drivers to come over, that's just, called a sign-up bonus or something like that. That's fairly easy. You don't even have to necessarily target Lyft. Just say, cool, we have a sign-up bonus this month. New drivers get 1,000 quid. Come on over. And then, but yeah, I think you're right. At the moment, people are doing both. They quite often get an Uber Eats and someone turns up with a delivery bag and gives me my food out of the delivery bag. So they're obviously on both delivering apps and so forth. Yeah, probably a little bit. I think everybody, tries to undercut their competition and whatnot, but to what level of conspiracy they go is.
That's my next question, actually. So, Sarah, you just mentioned Bolt and the other competitors. They're coming in without having to deal with all the fines, and the regulations have already changed, and it's in their favor. So, I mean, what do you guys both think about, that threat? So, is Uber mired in so much controversy? I don't think so. That people would think, let's go with Bolt, let's go with Captain, because they probably have got slightly lower prices at the moment. Is that going to damage Uber in the long term, or is it just going to level out?
I think it'll swing. I think there will be a market of people who swing to another option. Things like, there's been, there just has to be a story about a few assaults in Ubers, and people start going, all Ubers are unsafe now. Like, there'll be people who that tweaks for them and go, I don't feel safe in an Uber. There was some other app, I can't remember the name of it, but they brought in a security feature where the driver has to give you a PIN number or something as you get in the car, and like to extra level of security, and things like that. I think the point is they won't be able to take over the market. Like, Uber goes in, captures 90%, and then loses 20-30% to these competitors. They still get to hold on to the majority. They'll lose a bunch, but that's the reward at the end of paying all of these fees, lobbying the government. They'll go in and be the entity, and then there's competition, right? Like, how often have we read articles about Bolt's expansion or so forth? So they do a good job, and obviously they advertise really well. Like, we pay our drivers more than Uber, so you should feel good about supporting local drivers. You're not supporting a big billion-dollar tech company. That's why we're so great. And then so they will play off that, but I think, Bolt's never going to overtake Uber for market share, is it? We're not going to hear about Bolt being in 901 cities anytime soon. And that's the price. They come in second without the cost, but they come in second.
Yeah, I mean, do you ever say, don't worry, I'm going to Bolt there? No, you're going to say, I'm going to Uber.
Sounds right, though. Bolt.
Yeah.
But even if you're driving in a Bolt, I'm on my way. I'm just Ubering. They've got the brand recognition, they've got the naming, they've got all of those things. But I think we've discussed it here, and if we didn't, we've definitely discussed it offline, where the tech companies, and their success have made them the incumbent. So the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of this world came in and disrupted the media and the online and the retail space to go, these guys are the new, and it's 10 years down the line, they are the ones getting disrupted. They are the ones that are being pulled across the coals for being non-competitive, for being too big. And it's back to the same thing with Uber, is that they came in, they disrupted everyone, they killed many little taxi brands, and now they're they're the ones being chased. And I think it's almost the evolution of business. And And it's not, I don't think it's a bad thing, because competition creates a better service for and better value for your end clients. I believe that if no one came in and disrupted Uber, they would start winding back what they're offering their clients just to make a better margin. And that's what monopoly does. But as soon as you got this competitor, all of a sudden, hey, Uber needs to be on their toes, and Bolt needs to be better if they want to come in. And it's not necessarily a race to the bottom on a price scale, but it is from a value add, and what can we do here and what can we do there.
Yeah, on that price point. So one of the other kind of accusations that are out there, so this is the next supposed step in their playbook, if we listen to the accusations, is they then reduce fares, increase their commission, and increase driver numbers. So again, I have no idea how accurate this is, but apparently once they've got that market dominance, they need to push that into a profit. And as you said earlier, they've lost so much money because of all these various reasons. So supposedly what they do is by lowering the fares, they say to drivers, look, there's going to be many more rides because people want to spend, they think they make a saving. So you reduce the amount of downtime you have. So actually, overall, your income will go up. So that's what they supposedly say on paper. Uber math is what I've heard it's called. But in reality, a lot of drivers have turned around and said, no, we've not even been consulted. The prices have been dropped. We've been given no warning. And now our income is kaput. But for Uber, for the riders get a cheap journey. Uber gets more of a commission. It's the drivers who suffer from this.
Just from first-hand experience, I think the drivers really battled with that, because they, the fuel price is going up. They get speeding fines. They get all of these different things while they're going. And I know they shouldn't be getting speeding fines, but it's the nature of being on the road often. And if you reduce the rate per kilometer or per mile, the drivers have to be working on a just too many hours in a day. And then what they also did is, because they saturate the market so that the driver isn't working as often because there are too many cars, because that's the value proposition they want. They want there to be cars everywhere. But as a driver, I'm not working enough, and therefore I know the drivers that started out were making a lot of money, and they're making everyone's having to work lots of long hours just to kind of eke out a living now.
Yeah, well, that's why I can't remember if it was on here that we spoke about, actually, where or it might have been some other conversation I was having, but quite often what they rely on is drivers not doing the math of going, what's the depreciation of my vehicle? What am I spending on gas? How am I covering holiday, sick pay kind of equivalent? If you add all that up, they're barely making money, but obviously they rely on the drivers not doing that math and going, well, at least if I work longer hours or I get more rides, I'll cover it. So the math doesn't work out. What I actually thought you were going to jump to was things like putting in the surge pricing. So obviously that sort of came in as a new thing, and it does tell you, it says, there's a surge of interest at the moment, but quite often, they just pick peak hours, and then all of a sudden I'm paying 1.8 times the fare that I'm used to paying because it's 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, and so forth. So I know there was a lot of pain some people felt around that. It wasn't enough to ever make me completely get off Uber, but it would stop me sometimes going rides with them and going, fine, I guess I'll get a bus or I'll walk or something, because now it's 2.2 times more. Like, they're literally giving you the multiplier and going, yeah, it's Saturday at 1 a.m. It's 2.2 times. And I don't know if the drivers are getting that. I don't know if Uber's getting that, but that's them increasing it. I know with Uber Eats, they obviously, part of their market entry was no fees, and then all of a sudden now there's delivery fees on the website. So it used to be that I would just pay for my burger and chips, and now I'm paying my burger and chips plus £3 delivery fee. So obviously they got you on there, got you hooked, and then introduced a delivery fee. That was part of their marketing costs and part of their strategy. So yeah, I don't know too much about the reducing the prices, but I can imagine, it has to be in their model, right? Get market dominance, increase the rate, assume you'll lose some of the market, but you won't. And that's how they're eventually going to make money. Like you said, they're not profitable yet, but eventually they're going to have to be one day. and that's how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's
No, I
just
think
increase the prices rather than screw the drivers into the ground.
Yeah, we'll touch on the drivers very shortly because I think that goes into my next point, which that's the playbook done. But what I really wanted to focus on was the local regulation aspect, because I think for any company scaling into any region, compliance with local regulations is pretty crucial. So in Uber's kind of case, there's a lot of issues. So their head of global expansion in 2014, his name is Austin Gate. He had a quote. He said, "At this point, we go so quickly that I wouldn't say that it particularly matters. If we're not there now, we'll be there next week." So when you're scaling that fast, if you're thinking, here's our playbook, here's our 5, 6, 7 steps, we go into a region, 30 days later, next city, 20 days later, next city. At that pace, it's impossible to comply with all those local laws, which is why part of their playbook is ignore the laws, lobby the governments, we'll get there, we'll pay the fines. And Ben, you mentioned earlier, Uber lost their license in London, actually lost it twice in the past 2 years, and they had to keep appealing. Then there was also a case in London where apparently a lot of drivers, they would give their IDs away to other people, to other friends, and those people could log in pretending to be the other driver. So that was a flaw in the security system because that's not the person you vetted on as a driver. And one of the things that's come out of all of this, actually, from a regulation perspective, is a bunch of drivers all over the world, actually. So I don't know where it started, but there's lawsuits in multiple locations. I think the biggest one at the moment is in the UK. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and there is no decision just yet. Apparently, it's imminent. But a bunch of drivers said, we aren't contractors, we are employees. So if you're an employee of Uber, suddenly it changes the whole landscape. So, if I think at first instance, so it's been appealed multiple times and gone to the Supreme Court. Every time Uber's appealed, they've lost. And the courts have said, yes, Uber drivers are employees. So if that's the case and the Supreme Court agrees, Uber will now have to pay hourly minimum wages. They'll have to give paid breaks, sick pay, holiday pay. And if you put in a claim as a driver, you can get an average of roughly £12,000 in compensation for past work that you have done as an employee. So what I wanted to ask you guys is, from your opinion, obviously this is the gig economy. So Uber say, we're just an app. Drivers can sign in, they can work when they want. They don't have to work all these hours. Do you think they should be regarded as contractors, or is there a strong case for employees? Because Ben, as you were saying earlier, you've got surge rates and you've got all these other things and you've got changing in prices. So for Uber drivers, they say we don't actually control our hours. Uber's algorithm kind of chooses when we might get a ride. There might be people requesting near us, but we don't get the ping because of Uber's algorithm. And there's all these other various factors. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's a quite a few things here. Is that you have to kind of go. Ethics has to come into it at some point, right? And I think that Uber sacrificed ethics for fast expansion, and it plays out in a couple of levels. So it plays out in the fact that you openly ignoring local regulations, and you're taking it on the chin, and ethically, like where are you with that? And then it also filters down into how do I treat the drivers, what's best for everything else. So I think just ethically, they kind of said, we're going to park that. We're less worried about that. We're more worried about numbers, scaling, return on investment. We're not worried about a triple bottom line. We're not worried about how we're treating our staff because they're not staff. And I think there's a certain type of investor, there's a certain type of worker, there's a certain type of rider who won't care about that. But there is a bigger shift to being more conscious of that. And I think it's going to catch up with them eventually. I think the business model does not hold if they employ staff. It will die. They will close it down and they'll just say, I'm out of London.
Yeah, I think they actually did that. I think that was part of their argument in the States was like, okay, if you're going to make them employees, we're out. They're not going to try and make it work. And I think they've threatened that. It's like, cool, go back to getting a taxi cab then. Uber's out. So I know in California, this just recently passed where they don't have to make them employees so that Uber was successful in there. I think it was a group effort though. So Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, which is one of the delivery restaurant things in the States, so all got together and spent about $200 million lobbying the government against or for Prop 22, which was the proposition. And they were successful, and now they're trying. That was just in California, and they're trying to obviously expand it. I think whether or not they are, obviously their argument is, you don't. What job can you log into whenever you want and choose when you work and don't work, and if you want to be an employee, come work 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And like, there's so many people. I had a mate who used to, I think it was Deliveroo he delivered for, and that was just to make some extra cash. He'd jump on his bike with the thing and then just wait for a restaurant to come up, and then he'd go ride and deliver the food. And that, so I don't think he was an employee of theirs. That was him doing a gig. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I think you're right. If they ever pass it, Uber's gone. I think that they're losing so much money now. Imagine if they then have to pay minimum wage, annual leave, holiday pay, sick pay, and then trying to even build that infrastructure in, let alone actually doing it. They don't have anyone to manage any of that stuff. Health insurance in the States, like they just won't do it. They'll start backing out, which is then is that a big enough threat to some of the government to pull out? Yeah.
Their profit margins are so tight as it is, which is why they're not making any money. So suddenly you throw all of this into the mix, it's impossible. It doesn't even work as a business model. And then given the current pandemic, you've got to look after your employee well-being, and you've got drivers driving around, moving key workers around, taking patients to hospitals. Apparently in the UK, they're taxi drivers of any kind, whether it's Uber or minicabs or black cabs, 3 times more likely to catch COVID than anyone else in the country. So there's that risk as well, which Uber obviously doesn't want. And I think, Suraj, your point on the ethics is a key one. So kind of looking at ethical companies, I think that's a big thing in general, just on a human level, but also going back to the beginning of our discussion, when we're looking at Gen Z and looking at sustainability, ethics, what a company stands for, even the tide is just generally turning in general, where it's less about that capitalist environment where we're going to make money, here's the model, here's the numbers, let's ignore well-being. I think a lot more of it is shifting towards looking at that well-being. So I mean, I think that kind of sums up the expansion that I wanted to discuss with Uber. And I think before we finish up, just some lessons that we've learned from everything we've just said. So it's just repeating what we've gone over. But I think the top thing, localization. So tailor your product, your service to the region you're going to, just as Uber did with the user interface or general things about consumers. 2, we didn't actually discuss this in much detail, but market assessment. Look at that region you're going into. So for example, in the Middle East, Uber saw there was a company called Careem that dominated the market. Rather than take them on, they were like, let's just buy them. Bought them, got the market share. Russia, too difficult a market to capture, very distinct culture, language. They partnered with Yandex, which is a Russian kind of equivalent of Google. And they're working together, joint venture, funded it together. Let's start the ride sharing app. So it's a case of assessing your market. Who are the customers? How do we capture them? How do we adapt our business model? Actually, let's just pivot and do this. And then the third thing, which I think Uber hasn't done so well, which is what we've just been discussing, is complying with local regulations. Every country is different. Every country has different regulations. The UK law, Colombian law, Swiss law might define drivers as employees. Even within the US, Californian law may say no, New York law may say yes. So you have to bear that in mind, and that can be really costly. So in short, adapt to the local market, assess your competition, and hire a lawyer. Those are my tips for scaling companies.
Yeah, you would say that. Yeah. No, but I think that's so true. So true.
I think, it's been very interesting to look at. I think one thing to remember though is it's a bit of an outlier, right? Like how many other Ubers are there that we know that are just fighting off government regulation, like by going in, disrupting so much that they can stand up and go, cool, government, if you don't like us, we're out, and have government turn around and go, oh, actually, let's figure this out. Which is happening on some level. Obviously, some government will just say, no, we're not doing that. But yeah, I think it's an interesting model. I think, Zane, you're right that the future of investing and so forth as well, I think a lot more people are looking at this model of just flooding companies with money doesn't necessarily work. Quibi, the social media platform or whatever you want to call it, it was a video sharing platform. got like $1.6 billion and paid artists and all sorts, and died in 6 months. $1.6 billion gone 6 months. And so like just getting funding won't make it work. So that idea, I think, is there's a lot more focus and investment of proving market fit. I mean, you always had to do that, obviously, but like going slowly, entering a market correctly to almost future-proof yourself from some of these issues and costs as well. So yeah, I think there's some really good lessons in there. I think there's some things to think about what not to do and to, you know, think ahead and so forth. But like you said, the idea of getting into a country, assessing it, sometimes it's good to get someone over there on the ground and to assess it that way. You can't just purely sometimes do it from where you're sat and how you go about that. So yeah, a lot of interesting things to think about for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I think that sums us up for today. So
Excellent.
hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Look forward to next week.
Great.
Perfect. See you guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Yes.